The different forms of trauma. Presented by the Ward and Wellness Services. In association with CJ Ward Creations. Refugee children may have been exposed to terrible events or hardships in their home country, such as war, lack of food, water, and shelter, physical injuries, infections, and diseases, torture, forced labor, sexual assault, lack of medical care, loss of loved ones, school disruption or lack of access. During their displacement, refugee children are exposed to many of the same traumatic events or challenges that they experienced in their home country, as well as new ones, such as living in refugee camps, being separated from family, losing a sense of community, uncertainty about the future, harassment by local authorities, walking long distances. Core stressors for refugees. When refugee children are resettled in the United States, they may feel relieved. The obstacles they endure, however, do not cease when they arrive. Refugees may experience stresses in 4 categories after being relocated in the United States: traumatic stress, acculturation stress, resettlement stress, and isolation. When a child is exposed to a traumatic event that threatens or harms his or her mental and physical well-being, he or she develops traumatic stress. War and persecution can cause traumatic stress in refugees, as can displacement from their home, flight, and migration. Poverty, domestic and community violence. Resettlement stress is a combination of stressors that refugee children and families face as they strive to start a new life. Financial strains, difficulties locating sufficient housing, difficulties locating employment, loss of community support, lack of access to services. Transportation issues are just a few examples. Acculturation stress is a set of stressors that immigrant children and families face as they attempt to navigate between their new and old cultures. Conflicts between children and parents over new and old cultural views. Conflicts with peers over cultural misunderstandings. The need to translate for family members who are not fluent in English. School problems. Struggle to form an integrated identity that includes elements of their new culture and their culture of origin. Isolation stress. Isolation stress is a type of stress that refugee children and families face when they become minority in a new nation. Loneliness and the lack of a social support network are 2 examples. Discrimination. Harassment by peers, adults, or law enforcement. Interactions with others who don't trust the refugee child and family. Loss of social status. Feelings of not fitting in with others. Effects. Traumatic incidents or events that refugees have endured as a result of war or persecution. It's important to remember that youngsters are incredibly resilient and can often cope with adversity in healthy and useful ways. Such children may not show any signs and may not require intervention from service providers. Exposure to traumatic experiences, on the other hand, has a dramatic and long-term impact on the daily functioning of some youngsters. Children of all ages may experience the following symptoms as a result of stressful events: crying a lot, fear or anxiety, sadness or irritability, recurrent thoughts about the traumatic event, avoiding thinking or talking about anything that reminds him or her of the traumatic event, acting as if the event is happening right now, when it happened in the past. Trouble controlling behavior or emotions, body aches that don't seem to have a physical reason, hopelessness, nightmares, difficulty paying attention, difficulty falling asleep or sleeping too much, lack of desire to interact with others or participate in activities that he or she used to like, getting angry when things happen that remind him or her of the traumatic incident. Effects on people of different ages. Effects on people of different ages. The influence of traumatic events on children varies depending on the age and stage of development of the child. There are some symptoms of discomfort that are specific to a child's developmental stage as a result of exposure to stressful experiences. Consider the following scenario: preschool children, bedwetting, thumb sucking, acting younger than their age, trouble separating from their parents, Temper tantrums. Aggressive conduct such as punching, kicking, throwing things, or biting. Not playing with other kids their age. Children in elementary school, changes in their behavior, such as hostility, irritation, isolation from others, and sorrow. School problems. Peer problems. Fear of being separated from their parents. Fear of something horrible happening. Youth in middle and high school, a sense of responsibility or guilt for the awful things that have happened. Feelings of humiliation or embarrassment. Feelings of powerlessness. Changes in how they think about the world. Loss of faith. Relationship problems including problems with peers, family, and teachers. Screening and assessment. Providers should pay attention to engagement and cultural concerns as critical first steps when assessing trauma and mental health symptoms in refugee children. Inquire about the child's background, previous school experience, trauma history, and current stressors when examining a child's history, including current trauma exposure such as community violence. Inquire about specific behaviors that may be worrying for caregivers, example, isolating or not spending time with others. Not enjoying or engaging in activities, frequent outbursts. This may be a culturally appropriate way to communicate mental health concerns. Inquire about the symptoms and concerns, and respect the caregiver's or child's interpretation. Why do you think you're behaving this way, you might inquire. Or you are the best judge of your child. Do you have any reservations? Determine whether symptoms are culturally specific methods of expressing mental illness. Do you know anyone else who has these problems? You can simply inquire. Pay attention to the child's social and environmental factors, and how they might be contributing to the symptoms stated. Learning or cognitive differences/disabilities may be limiting the progress of children with school challenges. These are vital to recognize, even if they are difficult to quantify due to disparities in culture, language, and educational exposure. Resources for screening and assessment. Core Stressor Assessment Tool for Refugee Services provides users with information about 4 prevalent refugee stressors and walks them through a needs assessment for a specific youth or family. This web-based program developed by the Refugee Trauma and Resilience Center generates personalized recommendations for resources and interventions based on the assessment. Standardized measures for refugees. Includes a list of mental health assessments that have been translated and utilized with some of the refugee groups experiencing the highest rates of resettlement in the United States. The Measure Reviews database has further information on the reliability and validity of some of these measures. Interventions. Despite having experienced tragedy, refugee children and adolescents show resiliency. Trauma, on the other hand, can have an emotional and behavioral impact on a refugee child. Mental health providers should consider how the refugee experience, example, hunger, thirst, and a lack of shelter, injury and illness, being a witness, victim, or perpetrator of violence, fleeing your home and country, separating from family, living in a refugee camp, resettling in a new country, and navigating between the new culture and the culture of origin, may contribute to a child's or adolescent's emotional or behavioral presentation in a clinic. When involving immigrant children and families in the therapy process, keep the following in mind. Work to establish trust with all family members, not only to maximize therapy advantages, but also to ensure that the family will accept your recommendations and referrals. Pay attention to the family's worries, recognize the seriousness of their stated major issues, and treat the most basic or pressing requirements first. Pay special attention to areas of mental health care that are in line with the family's stated beliefs, such as assisting a child's academic performance. Discuss what the resource can give for the kid or family when recommending to additional services, and if possible, make it easier for the family to contact the referral. Refugee trauma. Definitions. Refugee. A refugee is someone who is outside his country of origin because to a well-founded fear of persecution for grounds of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, and is unable to or unwilling to seek protection from that country. The 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, Article 1. Asylum seeker. A person who does not fulfill the legal criteria of a refugee, but asks for asylum or refugee status after arriving in the United States or at a port of entry. When applying for asylum, applicants might have any or no immigration status. A USCIS asylum officer or an immigration judge from the U.S. Department of Justice's Executive Office of Immigration Review can grant asylum status. Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 208. What has it been like for refugee families? Many refugees, particularly children, have endured trauma as a result of conflict or persecution, which can have long-term effects on their mental and physical health. These traumatic experiences might occur when refugees are in their home country, during their displacement from their home country, or during the resettlement process in the United States.